Hello and welcome to this video on the grammar of lesson 15 in Lily de Silva's Pali Primer. In this lesson we look at the optative, sometimes called the optative or optative, sometimes also called the potential mood. And it's used to express generally something hypothetical, often advice, even an instruction, let no person do such and such, is very, very frequently used. It largely reflects the use of the subjunctive in languages such as Latin and the languages descended from Latin. And it's generally the opposite of the indicative, which indicative indicates it states a fact. The optative basically indicates a potential fact, a desired fact, something that's not yet an actual fact, but potential or desired, or something like that. It's also used, for example, in things like parables, instructive stories, as for example, suppose, O monks, that a skillful butcher was cutting up a carcass, and he might do such and such, and he might do such and such. So what's being described here is not an actual person performing those acts, in which case the indicative would be used. The optative, potential, is used because it's a hypothetical case, a story given by way of parable. So let us look now at Lily de Silva, lesson 15, that's page 59 in the printed book. I will get my iPad screen up for you. I've just described what it expresses. The Lily de Silva says the optative expresses mainly probability, advice, ideas, such as those conveyed by English expressions if, might, or would. And it's formed by adding eya to the verbal base before the terminations. And the terminations, as given here in the book, you'll see the second and first persons, the you and the I and the we, look like the present tense of the third person, he, she, it, and they are a little bit different. So pacheya said if he would cook. No, well, not quite. It's just the optative of pach. So root pach, you see. He, she, it cooks. Pachati. And the optative pacheya. Note that the optative, through all its various forms, has this characteristic vowel e there. Almost invariably, there are a couple of exceptions in what look like irregular verbs, but we'll come to those, and they aren't in fact problematic at all. So you cook, singular, is indicative, is pachasi, but you might cook, you might be cooking, is pachayasi. I am cooking, is pachami. I might be cooking, I might cook, would cook, is pachayami. In the plural, they cook, as you know, is pachanti. They might cook is pacheyum. Notice this ending there. It's not the anti ending. Pachanti, they cook. Pacheyum, they might cook. You cook, in the plural, is pachata. Pachasi, singular. Pachata, you, plural, cook. And optative, pachayata. Oops. Pachayata. And we cook is pachama. And we might cook pachayama. Now, as often happens, what Lily de Silva has said here is not wrong, but it is, so to speak, entry level. It's only part of the story. And you are going to see, in fact, you're very frequently going to see, on every page of Pali, you are going to see alternative forms. But fear not, there is a kind of logic and reason to them. And as so often happens, this logic and reason becomes entirely evident to us if we go back to the Sanskrit. So to give you the broader picture, what I will do, I will call up MacDonnell just to look at the optatives in MacDonnell. Then we'll go on to Perniola, Perniola's Pali grammar, to see a little bit more about it. And then finally, I'll take you through those parts of the Karaniyametta Sutta where we have already examined. In fact, I've done a video on it, and we can examine the different forms of the optative shown in the Karaniyametta Sutta. So I will now go to screen, share screen, and here we are. I'm calling up MacDonnell. You all have the access. You will have access to this through my study resources sheet. It's on page 20 of the current one. In fact, it's in. Let me just call it up for you here. See Sanskrit grammar lessons and notes. It's on currently on page 20. These page numbers, of course, change as this sheet gets added to. But if we go down to page 20. And then this is where the link to MacDonnell is, and that's the link that I've clicked to get to where I am on the shared screen now. So look at the paradigms. It's in paragraph 132, which I think actually is the longest single paragraph, longest single section in MacDonnell, because he gives the paradigms for the conjugation of all of the verbs in the present system. That's the present imperfect, imperative, and optative. Now let's look at the optative. This is from the regular verb bhavami, bhavasi, bhavati, and in plural bhavama, bhavata, bhavanti. Very close, almost the same as the Pali. In the present, in the singular, it's the same, bhavami, bhavasi, bhavati. In the plural, bhavama. In Sanskrit, bhavamaha, see where I'm circling with the visarga. The only difference between Sanskrit and Pali here is that the visarga is not there. Bhavama, we are. Bhavata, you are, you plural. Bhavanti, they are. So it's, for our present purposes, virtually identical, but for that visarga. And as always, because we're talking about Pali now, we can ignore the dual. Now let's go down to the optative, and bhaveyam, bhaveh, bhavet, plural bhavema, bhaveta, bhaveyu. The endings, you will see the characteristic m and the h there that represents the s, which is bhavasi, bhave, bhavati, bhavet. The ema, eta, notice eta without the aspiration there. It's bhavata with aspiration in the indicative, but in the imperative In Pali, bhavata has the aspiration in the imperative. Appamadena sampadeta, the aspirated ta. But in Sanskrit, it's the unaspirated ta for the imperative second plural. Likewise, the optative in Pali, this would be bhavayata, as I've just shown you on the screen here. You see pachayata in Sanskrit. In Sanskrit, bhaveta and bhaveyu. Note the here. Sorry. There's a characteristic e in all of them. Bhaveyam, bhavet, bhavema, bhaveta, bhaveyu. I'll continue to ignore the dual. Pali students don't need to concern themselves with it at all. And it's the same in the Atmanepada. On the left-hand group here, these 9 that I'm circling are the Parasmaipada, the transitive active, and on the right, it's the Atmanepada, what we call the middle voice, of which remnants and traces remain in Pali, some of them quite important, so we will need to look at them. So, having seen what it does in Sanskrit, now let's look a little bit further at what happens in Pali. Lily de Silva tells us about one form only, which is the form in Aya. Incidentally, there's also an Pachaya, there's also an Ayati, but you don't see it very much, but it does exist for the third singular. To go now to a slightly fuller look at it, let us go to Perniola, Pali grammar. On page 85 of the printed book, but in case some of you have different editions of it, it's paragraph number, or heading reference number 77, which is the optative. Now, if you look at the way that Perniola puts it, you will see that there's the first group that he gives do very closely follow what Lily de Silva has said. He's using the base lub, so labhayame follows the Lily de Silva's pachayame, labhayasi, pachayasi. Perniola gives the labhayati form, which is, as I just said, not very much used. It exists, but far more common is just the aya form, which is the only one that Lily de Silva gives. In the plural, labhayama, that's, you see, coincides with that pachayama, labhayata, pachayata, correct. He doesn't give the plural, a third plural there, he omits it, on the grounds that the forms that he is giving here are those that reflect the indicative, ami, asi, ati, ama, ata, anti. Well, there's none of the optatives end in anti. In fact, in Sanskrit they end in u with visarga, and in Pali they end in an which is why he omits it from that list. So Perniola goes on to say, I'm looking down near the bottom of page 85, this is the simplest way of forming the optative, that is by adding to the stem of the present without the final vowel, that's the abhav, ati, and so on, adati, and so on, the suffix aya and the primary personal endings. Okay, so labha, labhayami, pachayami, garo, as in karoti he does, kareyami, I might do, from the root, Sanskrit root shru, Pali su, meaning to hear. We know that's a fifth class verb, shrunomi, and in Pali we can get sunomi and tsunami become ninth class. So we get the present stem is the sunnayami, I might hear, sunnayami. Chinteti, Sanskrit chintayati, Pali chinteti, optative chintayami. And he mentions that in this form the third person plural is missing. Well, there is one in a different form of the optative for the reasons I mentioned, but no optatives end in anti in Sanskrit. So Perniola goes on at the top of page 6. The optative is also formed by adding to the stem of the present, chooses the labha, the suffix e and the secondary personal endings. So he does this progression through impermissible forms to show how it gets to the permissible forms. So for the first person, Perniola gives this example: labha plus e plus and he takes that through the up. E tends to become a, so labhe labheam. So not this one is not labheyami. You can have labheyami. You can also have the shorter form labheam. And it also permitted to have it with a double here. So labheim, or as we've just seen earlier, labheyami. And I would emphasize, unless you are really keen on learning it all by heart, all these complexities and variant forms, unless you really want to, I would say it's entirely unnecessary at the moment. Just learn to recognize them. That's the most important thing, to recognize it as an optative. And as I mentioned earlier, one giveaway is that you have this a throughout the conjugation of it. So, taking this hypothetical form, I say hypothetical because you don't actually see it written like this. Labha is the second termination s. Labhes and becomes labhe. And equally, labha it becomes labhet. In Pali, I just put asterisks here to show you that these are forms that don't actually exist, but they're given by way of illustration to show how the existing form does come into existence. So labhet becomes labhe. And similarly, labhema, labheta, then labhe becomes labheum. You're allowed to have three forms here again. It's labheum, labheyum with a W, or just labheyu. Sometimes that M drops off. So they might obtain. You see, you can have labheyum, or with a double ear, labheyum, or without the final visarga, labheyu. Generally speaking, the forms with the are more common. Sorry, but you will encounter the forms with the u. Halfway down page 86. Sorry, I was just saying halfway down page 86. You'll see the shortened form where labheyam, labheya, and labhe are the same, just can become further shortened, just labhe. So if you see the form labhe, bhave, sune, and so on, it can be first, second, or third person. You'll have to determine from the context which one it is. In Sanskrit, of course, you wouldn't have that problem. All the forms would be distinct, as usual in Sanskrit, but you will see this in Pali, and we're going to see it in a few minutes' time when we look at the optatives as they occur in the Karaniya Metta Sutta. Now, in subparagraph C, I'm looking about 2/3 of the way down page 86 in the printed book. The optative being formed by adding to the stem of the present without the final vowel the suffix ya and the present personal endings. So you may well ask, what has happened? Well, I'm going to show you what's happened. As so often, go back to the Sanskrit and everything becomes clear. So, this is the optative now of the first, the far more common conjugation. That's classes 1, 4, 6, and 10. The second conjugation, as all of the other classes, although there are 10 classes, they're divided into 2 conjugations because all of the verbs of what's often called the first conjugation, as classes 1, 4, 6, and 10, show identical sets of endings. And the second conjugation, everything else, also show a high degree of consistency in their endings. And the most important thing to note, looking at the second conjugation, is that whereas in the first conjugation, bhaveyam, bhavet, there, in the second one, you get this characteristic ya, not ayam but yam, not ayah but yah, not et but yat. And this ya, and this is very regular now throughout all of the conjugations. Let's go through. So juhuyam, juhuya, juhuyat. Fifth class, su, to press out. Sunuyam, sunuyah, sunuyat. Rud, to obstruct. Rundyam, rundyah, rundyat. Ninth class, kri, to buy. Kriniyam, kriniyah, kriniyat. There are certain verbs in Pali, it doesn't form a coherent and complete regular conjugation, but there are certain verbs that reflect how those same verbs behaved in regular Sanskrit. So, for example, if we look at the first example that Perniola gives, is to know. Janyat. Let's just turn the page. Let's look at this root, nya. To know. And as we know, this is a ninth class. It adds the na, the infix na. It's called the kri class. Kri root, krinami, I buy, Pali kinami. This is a ninth class. You would expect it to go, if it were fully regular, which is not, na, mi, si, ti, and so on. What happens, and it is irregular, but this, in the present stem, this nya drops out, which is why you have in Sanskrit janati, he knows, janami, I know. Exactly the same as in Pali. That's why we have this jnana, Sanskrit jnana, Pali jnana, because the j and the nya are still in place, jnana, but the present stem follows the Sanskrit, not jnanati, but janati. Let us now see what happens in a ninth class. Here we are, kriniyat. So, krinami, krinasi, krinati. It would be janiyam, kriniyam. So in Pali it stays as a na. In Sanskrit, the ni and the na alternate according to regular rules. But so jani, he might know, in Sanskrit is janiyat, as in kriniyat. And it's a lot of detail to take in, but the great thing about it is with Sanskrit, it's all very regular and orderly, and it helps you understand the Pali. So when we see this a form like janyam in Pali, which is an optative form meaning I might know, well, what's happened? How can janyam mean I might know? Well, this is how it happens. Look at kriniyat, kriniyam on screen. I might know in Sanskrit is janiyam, forming the optative in the regular janiyam. And what's happened is through intermediate processes, again I'm putting this asterisk, sorry, I'm writing on my iPad without showing you, sorry. This janiyam then would get softened, and this is a form that we don't actually see in Pali, but it explains what's happened. So this here, janyam, then becomes, with the long a shortening before a consonant cluster, and the n plus y as regular becomes a nya. So it becomes janyam, and that's how from the regular janiyam in Sanskrit you could janyam, janyam. The next example given is karyat, kayira. In Sanskrit, let's just stick to the third person for the moment. It's slightly irregular because the stem becomes kur. So he might do is kuryat. Slightly irregular in Sanskrit, but not too irregular if you know the underlying rules. And so that becomes, you'll see in Pali, karya, or more commonly with metathesis, that's a swapping round of the y and the r, you often have that. You see the word kayira. This is quite a common verb from this very common word to do. So kayira, he, she, or it might do or might make. Worth learning that, even if you haven't got to understand how it comes into existence. Worth learning that form kayira, you often see it. And from the root da, for example, in Sanskrit it is a third, dadyami. Sorry, dadami, dadati. So from the present stem, then dad, you get dadyat. He might give. Again, this is actually regularly formed in Sanskrit. And this gives the, if you see the Pali form, dadja, you might think, well, how could that mean he might give? Well, the answer is from da, Sanskrit dadyat, he might give. So dadyat quite regularly becomes dadja, or much more commonly dadja with a short a in Pali, he might give. And Paniola also gives the example of vada, with the Sanskrit form vadyat, he might say, which in Pali becomes vajja, vajja. So vad through vadyat, regular Sanskrit, Pali vajja, sorry, vajja. And the third person plurals would end in the so they might give is dajum. You also see things like dadayum, you will also find those, but this will just explain to you why you might also see, just so you can understand, Vajum, vajum, they might give, they might say. And at the bottom of page 86, Paniolo tells you about a double formation. And then from the double, he gives that to Dajja, which we've just seen. And then from Dajja, Dajjayasi. Well, it's kind of a doubled optative. It doesn't alter the meaning. It's just that the Pali speakers didn't like this kind of abbreviated form Dajja. Didn't sound quite optative enough, so they, for the avoidance of all doubt, they put a full optative ending on it. The Dajjayasi, Dajjayama, Dajjayata, Dajjayum, and so on. Again, as I said, don't bother to learn all this by heart. Note it and recognize it when you see it. Top of page 87, there's a note about the in poetry. Sometimes the first plural ends in a mu, vindemu, janemu. That's very rare, and you won't. I don't think I've ever encountered that in prose. It talks about a rare optative nicheya, formed from the root and not from the present stem. This I'll explain this nicheya, because you might come across it. Nicheya, as Paniolo observes, it makes the optative unusually from the root rather than from the present stem. It's from the root chi, which means to pile up. Basic root means to pile up. Nishchi is to make a determination or a decision about it. In Sanskrit, it's a class 5 verb, so it becomes nishchinoti. And in Pali, as often happens, this class 5, Sanskrit class 5, flips over to a class 9. So nichinati, he determines, he decides in Pali. Now, the point that Paniolo is making, so it's formed from the root and not the present stem. The present stem, nichinoti, let's go to the Pali, nichinati, you would have expected to see, for the optative, nichineya. That would be the regular way of forming it, but in fact, by an anomaly, it is actually nicheya. Again, we don't really know why. Anomalies occasionally just happen. This is one. Something rather more important for you to learn is in paragraph G, near the top of 87. It's the optative of the verb as, meaning to be, as in so many languages. Sanskrit and Pali included. It is somewhat irregular. The Latin esse, to be, the French être, and Spanish ser, and so on. In Sanskrit, one of the characteristics of this root is that often the a will drop off. So santi, they are not asanti, but santi. And it drops off throughout the optative as well. So actually it's a class 2 verb. It should be asyam, asyah, asyat, which it would be if it were regular. And I'm going to call up, it's a class 2 verb, which is the dvish class. You see, look at from the root dvish, regularly formed, optative dvishyam, dvishyah, dvishyat. You would normally, from the root as, which belongs to the same class, you would have asyam. I'm giving you forms that don't exist. Asyam, asyah, asyat. But what happens with this irregular stem is that the first vowel drops off. So you just get syam, syah, syat. And in the plural, syu. I'm giving you this in Sanskrit now. Syam, syah, syat. Syama. sorry, you do siata, and then just syu. They might be. This is all in Sanskrit. What happens in Pali? The Siam, the vowel of the as tends to keep itself, not always, but tends to keep itself in place. So you get Asyam becomes in Pali Assam. And for you, Syah is Assa. Now for he might be, you can get Assa, Syat Assa, or a form that more closely resembles the Sanskrit, and that is Siya. So you will very often see in Pali, for he, she, or it may be Assa or Siya, and they're used without any distinction of meaning. And for the plural, the Sanskrit is Syama, and in Pali we have more regularly is Assama. Syata is Assata, and for the plural you can have Assu, or more closely reflecting the Sanskrit, Siyum. You see this ending this characteristic third person plural optative ending always, I think it's right to say always, becomes or optionally just u in Pali. Paniola now deals briefly with the Atmanopada, which in Sanskrit called the Atmanepada, the word, the pada Atmane for oneself, which does not form a consistent and coherent form of conjugation in Pali, but you see traces of it here and there, and you are going to see it in a moment when we go through the Karaniya Metta Sutta. So I will call up, let's look at the simplest verb, first conjugation, optative, and here we are, the Atmanepada, which of course there's a full, complete conjugational paradigm for it in Sanskrit. Note that again we have this characteristic e appearing throughout it. Won't bother with the duals of bhaveya, bhaveta, bhaveta. Know the difference? Parasmaipada bhavet, Atmanepada bhaveta. Bhavemahi, bhavedvam, and bhaveran. You will sometimes see this eran ending in Pali, labheran. They might obtain that's where it comes from. Now, if we look at Perniola, I'm looking now halfway down page 87 under paragraph 78. So again, Perniola is quite right in saying there are some stray forms that you see in Pali. So labheyam is the first thing, labheyam, which again doesn't quite reflect the Sanskrit. The Sanskrit bhaveya would be labheya without the m at the end. The next one he gives for the second singular is labheto. Now, why to? Because it's in Sanskrit it would be labhetah. Then if the ah is shortened to an ah, the final ah, short ah with a visarga, characteristically becomes o in Pali. That's why we would have labheto, bhaveto. Far more importantly, these are quite rare, you won't see these much. Far more importantly, you will see the ending labheta. So I'm just going to write, sorry, on my iPad, labheta. You will often see this, the eta ending in Sanskrit, labheta. Note importantly that in the optative it is an unaspirated T, in the Pali it is aspirated. This is Pali in Sanskrit. In the plural, if you look at bhavemahi, that's right, it uses the same verb that that Paniola is using, labhemahi. This mahi, this is quite characteristic. Ahai, ahi, this ahi ending, bhavamahi, bhavamehe. You see, this rather than the mah with the visarga bhavama that you see, you get the, it's changed to an H followed by a vowel, mahe, mahi, mahi, and e mahi. You'll often see it in Pali changing to an S. Labhe mahi, Sanskrit, labhe mase. In Pali, we might obtain. For the second person, sorry, I forgot to show you what I was writing. Labhe mahi, labhe mase. For the second person, in Sanskrit, edvam. This dvam ending is characteristic of in Sanskrit of the second person plural atmanepada. And this dva will morph into a v in Pali. So labhedvam, sorry, oops, come on, labhe avho. You don't often see that at all. And finally, if you look at the optative, third person plural, sorry, atmanepada, third person plural, bhaveran in Sanskrit, bhaveran. Those of you who are familiar with the n, dental n becoming a retroflex n after a r, why isn't it retroflex? The answer is if the n is the last consonant in the word, then it will remain dental. And bhaveran is correct. And so in Sanskrit, labheran, they might obtain, and in Pali, you'll actually even sometimes see that final N, which is rare in Pali, but you will see it sometimes in the optative. And I suspect it's because this form of the atmanepada optative only started coming into use in the later literature when there was a little bit more Sanskrit influence. So you'd find that they want to reflect the Sanskrit, say labheran rather than labheram. So there we are. And it just mentions finally the root kri as kayirata in the third person. So kri, atmanepada, kayirata. Again, it's a bit irregular, he might do. It's a little bit irregular, but you will often see it. So sorry, I've forgotten to show you what I was writing again. So labheran, same in Pali and kayirata, he might do. As I say, irregular, but learn it, you will see it. What I'm now going to do is to call up the editions I did for you of the Karaniya Metta Sutta a while ago. It's up on the study resources sheet. me just call up my. Let me pause for a moment. Here we are. Here we have it. The Karane Metta Sutta, which is my full analyzed version. What I'm going to do, rather than go through the whole thing, is just look at all of the optatives, and I think they're all in the third person because they're saying what should be done by a person who wishes to follow tan sam tam padam. Right, the first optative we have is in verse 3. Oops. Nachikuddong samachare. Look, chare here, it could have been chareya, but it's the short form. Samachare, let no one commit or do or indulge in. Samacharati, let no one indulge in. Samachare. Yena vinu pare, yena by which vinu the wise pare later, upavadeyum. Here, look at this. This is the ayum ending. They might blame. Again, this is absolutely perfect use of the optative. You're not saying you have done this and so you will be blamed later. It's saying this is something for which one might be blamed later. Note here, these are not optatives. Huntu and bhavantu is just alternative forms of the same word. Bhavantu is very exactly reflects the Sanskrit. This is the third person imperative. It's kind of stronger than the optative. Optative, let it be, might it be. Bhavantu, it's kind of a stronger form of a wish. You can express an imperative to the you do that, but in Sanskrit you can express an imperative in the third person. That is how it should be. All beings, they should be happy. They must be happy. So don't confuse them. This characteristic, you, I think 99% of the time, I'm probably not too far off by saying 99% of the time, these third person plural imperatives you're going to see ending in tu or antu. That's that characteristic third person plural ending. Singular tu, plural ntu, hontu, bhavantu. Okay. Let's look for our next optative. Again, a bit short of verbs in verse 4. Here we've got an ordinary indicative, vasanti, the statement of fact, those who live. You're not saying who might live, those who do live. And then again, the imperative, bhavantu, may they be happy. Now, look now in verse 6. Nikubeta. This is that ending we discussed. Let me just call my iPad. This eta ending would be eta, which is the atmanepada. Labheta with an unaspirated ta, labheta with an aspirated ta in Pali, and it has come in here. You don't find it that much in the earlier prose, the prose of the suttas, but you do find it a lot more in the later poetry. When you get, as time went on, you get slightly more Sanskritic influences coming in. Now it's still pure Pali, but you can just tell these little influences. So, naparoparam nikubeta, let one not deceive. And the same, it echoes here. Nati manyeta, this eta ending. At the end of the second line, nanyamanyasa dukkam ichaya. Again, we're now in more normal form. So let me enlarge this a bit for you. A more normal form of the optative. Ichati, he, she, it wants. Na, ichaya, let one not want or desire. Na, anyamanyasa dukkam ichaya, let none desire the dukkha, desired dukkha for another. Into verse 7. Matayatha nyamputam ayusa ekaputam anurakhe. Right, this is now the short form. It could be eya, it could even be eyati, but more commonly eya. But here we see the short form of the optative. If it were the indicative, it would be anurakati. But if you were talking, that mother is protecting her child, mata puttam anurakati, making a statement. But here it's a hypothetical statement, just as a mother might or would protect. Optative anurakhe. So it's the optative, not of desire, something that should happen. It's the optative of how it generally happens. Hypothetically, that's what we expect to see happening. Anurakhe. And here, evam pisabhabhute sumanasam bhavaye. Again, bhavaye in Sanskrit, it would be bhavayet. Let one cultivate or nurture. So, optative again, bhavaye. And then the same bhavaye is repeated in verse 8, manasam bhavaye parimanam. No more there. Go down to verse 9. Right. Here the longer form, aditeya. It could equally have been adite, but aditeya. Let one, the adhisthana kind of set it up, maintain, it's translated here. So I think that's it for the optatives in the Karaniya Metta Sutta. So here you will see in one and the same short work, you've got the longer form, the aditeya. You've got the shorter form, bhavaye. Couple of the shorter forms, anurakhe. And you've got the one that's the reflection of the Sanskrit Atmanepada, the Natimanyeta, and Nikubeta and Natimanyeta in the same verse, in the Ichaya. So there we are. Hopefully this has given you a reasonable view of the optative. As I say, what Lily de Silva has to say about it's not wrong, but as you can see, it is within the confines, of course, within the confines of her entry-level book. She gives it in its simplest form. Be aware of these other forms, and Perniola is a very good work to get those from, and just be aware of them as you go along. So good. That's it. That's it for the optatives. I hope this has been of some use to you. Thank you.